The following is a production of the Dallas Genealogical Society. For more information, please visit our website at dallasgenealogy.org.
So I would like to ask Patty Smith to come up here and introduce our speaker for today.
Good morning, everyone, here in Dallas and online. We're happy to have you here. I'm super excited about the program today. I was able to hear Christopher Bryant, our speaker, today. I heard him talk in Duncanville at one of the family events, and I kept my eye on him when the program closed because I wanted to snag him and say, could you please come and talk to our group at Dallas Genealogical Society. Luckily, Christopher lives right here in the Dallas area. We are very happy to have his mother and father here today. Mimi and Papa, will you wave and say hello? His gorgeous wife is here with their twin daughters. So adorable. We are so happy to have you guys here. Christopher is extremely qualified to speak with us today, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. He does have a website, by the way. I'm going to get this right up front. If you want to write down his website, cdbryantgenealogy.com. Christopher is an author, educator, family heirloom preservationist, graphic designer, oral historian, interviewer, reunion planner, transcriber, and cemetery researcher. Boy, we love those kind of qualifications. That is awesome. His focus is in African American research, American Indian, Native American Indian, Hispanic heritage, and DNA, which is one of my favorites. His research area and location is in the United States, Canada, England, Germany, Italy, Mexico, and Spain. What a huge variety, and super intelligent young man we're going to be talking about, or that will be talking to us today. Christopher is a member of the Association of the Professional Genealogists. He is a member of Dallas Genealogical Society, the African American Historical Society, and the Tennessee Genealogical Society. Will you please help me welcome our speaker today, Christopher Bryant?
Let's try this again. Good morning to everyone that is here in person and everyone that is joining us via Zoom. I am grateful and appreciative for this opportunity. I'm thankful to have my family, my immediate family, my wife and my children, as well as my parents here today. So let's begin. How traditional genealogy meets DNA to solve stubborn brick walls. I want to begin by talking about exactly what genealogy is. There are a lot of misconceptions of exactly what is under the umbrella of genealogy, but I just want to give a little bit of clarification. Then move on to the information that is obtained from census records, then the difficulty of documenting African American history, the introduction to DNA, as well as go into further detail about two specific brick walls that I have overcome myself personally. So let's start with genealogy. Genealogy has been defined as the study and tracing of lines of descent. When one thinks about this, they think about finding an ancestor and each of the children, then the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren. So as you do this and as you research, you use some original sources. Some of those sources are vital records, which are birth, marriage, and death certificates. Some are fortunate to have church records. There are immigration records that we can utilize, military records, obituaries, as well as last will and testaments. Some of the secondary sources that some families are fortunate to have are biographies that were actually written by the person themselves, various prior genealogy work that an ancestor has done on the family, as well as other local histories that you might find within the area. But to me, the most popular is census records. So I kind of wanted to give a background to census records. From about 1790 to 1860, only the whites were shown. Now, there are a few instances where there were African Americans shown, and that is in the northeastern portion of the United States where there were actually free people of color. So those people were actually shown in the census. In each of these censuses, there were only a little bit of information that was given. If you go back to the earliest census, there's literally the head of the household and then numbers under each column as to who fits within the different age brackets. So it doesn't really give you a name or too much information about that person themselves. As we move on to the 1850s, we then have the name of the person, their age, their sex, their color, occupation, value of their assets, as well as their place of birth. Also in 1850, we begin to start seeing slave schedules. This is the list of all of the slaves that are underneath that particular person. The slaves are only listed by, not by name, but by their gender, their color, and their approximate age. In 1870 is when we began to see African Americans that are then listed by their name, age, and their birthplace. At this time, they have not included the relationship of all of the people in the house. So you have to think of the time period in which we're living shortly after Emancipation Proclamation. African Americans were literally just trying to find shelter. They were just trying to find somewhere to live, basically. So it could have been other members that were on their plantation that they just grouped themselves together just to try to have a combined effort to be able to live and to survive. So it might not necessarily be that these people were biologically connected, but that they were connected because they lived in the same place. Now in 1880, we then begin to see the relationship between the people in the house. And it also includes, for me, this is very important, the place that the person's mother and father were born. In doing some of my personal research, I have seen where the parents have been born in Africa. It states that they were born at sea, which means that if you look at the birth of the person, this means they were literally born on a slave ship traveling here, which is monumental for African-American research. In 1900 and 1910, it actually lists the years that the couple were married. So to me, this gives us another gauge to verify the marriage index that you find for the person to see if you're actually dealing with the same person. It also tells us the number of children that were born to the mother, as well as how many children were still living. This could be a huge tool in trying to decipher as to whether or not a child actually belongs to a set of parents. If you're looking at a mother and you have too many children, then that means that some of the children may have been adopted in. They could have been nieces, nephews that the family took over after the parents were deceased. In 1920 and 30, they begin to show the name, age, race, gender, marital status, birthplace, and their occupation. 1940 also gives an indication of the same attributes that were in 1920 and 30, but it also includes the person's location in 1935. So if you have a specific event that transpired in your family between 1930 and 1940, the 1940 census may be a good place to look to see where your ancestor or your family member was in 1935. So that kind of shortens your window. So instead of you trying to figure out between 1930 and 1940, you could actually be looking between 1930 and 1935 or 1935 to 1940. And most recently, the 1950 census gives the basic plain information, the name, age, race, gender, marital status, birthplace, and occupation. So now we'll talk about the difficulty of documenting the African-American history. This is something that has always been important to me because growing up, I was always the nosy kid, always wanting to sit around the adults, always trying to listen to see what they were talking about. And sometimes I was successful, and I was able to gain a lot of knowledge that was not publicly known to the rest of the family. But prior to 1870, the records for African Americans are very scarce. You may be fortunate enough to find your male ancestor in 1867 to 1869 in the voters registration. That's the first time that African-American men were able to vote after the Emancipation Proclamation. I have been fortunate enough to find last will and testaments that actually list my ancestors as the property of the slave owner. It was my 5 times great-grandparents, their children, grandchildren, and some of their great-grandchildren were listed in this list, along with their value. And those are some of the personal records that we pretty much have to rely on because there is no other written documentation that actually physically tracks African American. So that leads me to the popularity of DNA. DNA is truly the only thing that we can hold on to, and we know for certain that it is the truth. I like to use the phrase, DNA will tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth every single time. I don't care what your grandparents tell you. I don't care what your parents tell you. DNA will tell you the truth every single time. So DNA, there are a lot of different tests that have come out. The most popular is the autosomal DNA test that's done with Ancestry and some of the other companies. And it's able to take you back approximately about 7 generations. So I would say that it would be your best bet to go to your most eldest family member and have them submit a DNA sample. That means that their DNA can stretch back further into history than yours would be able to. Some of the popular companies are Ancestry, Family Tree DNA, 23andMe, and MyHeritage. Now, I have to dedicate this to my grandparents. My grandfather passed away this past December, but my grandmother is still living, but they were able to give me a lot of information. My grandfather, as a little kid, would always tell me stories, and I would say, now, Bubba, is that true? Yeah, son, that's true, that's true. And I'm like, that can't be true. That honestly cannot be true. But now that I'm doing my research, it was true. We just had some family members that like to live life and live life to the fullest. So I do dedicate this presentation to them, and my case studies, my brick walls were based on information from their particular sides of the family. So I'll begin with my maternal grandfather. So I have always wanted to know more about his family. There were a lot of kids. And as a kid, I used to say, this cannot be all of their kids. I mean, there were like 10, 11, 12 kids, all of them still living, all of their children still living, all of their grandkids still living. So to have a family function, it was huge. It was massive. Cars lined up all down the street. I mean, people over here, people over there. I mean, it was just people. And I was always curious as to how each one of those people connected to me personally. So my grandfather knew his 2 times great-grandparents. I have to kind of explain his dynamic. His biological mother, his birth mother, passed away when he was 6 months old. She was 15 years old, and so that left the responsibility of him to his grandmother. So he was raised by an older generation, which still had contact with other elder members of the family. So he was privy to a lot of that information that most of us are not, because our elders have already passed away. So he was privy to a lot of the information with a lot of the elders. So he was able to give me a lot of information growing up. So let's begin with my 3 times great-grandparents. This is the 1900 census. In the 1900 census, it states that the wife, the mother, has given birth to 10 children, and 9 of those children are still living. 8 of them are living in the home. In 1910, she has given birth to 13 children. 12 of them are still living, and 9 of them are living in the home. I kind of put a red circle around Jake. That is one of their sons. In doing my research, I was not able to find information on Jake. So I said, okay, I'll just put a pin right here, move on to my research. But I kept coming back to Jake. There was something about Jake that I knew I had to find out. So my first brick wall, no known whereabouts of their son, of my 3 times great-grandparents' son, Jake, or also listed as Jacob. So what did I do? I went to DNA. In DNA, this is my grandfather's first closest DNA match that I did not immediately know the connection. Mind you, I grew up around my grandparents a lot. A lot of the extended family still came around the house and would visit. So I would say I'm comfortable with looking at my DNA matches and knowing at least the first 2 or 3 categories of the DNA matches. I am comfortable enough to say that because even going to church as a little boy, I was going to church with a 5-generation church. So I literally knew everyone in my family and was very comfortable with knowing this. But this particular person, matching my grandfather so closely, I had no idea who he was. So I reached out. And he told me that his father's name was Gregory Punch and he was born in New York. So I went to digging and look what I found. The birth index for a Gregory Punch born in New York. I said, well, how could Gregory Punch be born in New York? So that means his parents had to be in New York. So I started looking for Punches in New York. And who did I find? Jackie, AKA Jake Punch, in New York in 1930, living with his wife. They're listed as rumors, but that is his wife. And those are actually her children from her previous marriage. In 1940, there he's listed as Jacob with the same wife and their children. I said, now, interesting enough, I need to find something on Gregory. I have to connect Gregory to Jacob. So with the recent revealing of the 1950 census, look who I found. Jacob with his wife Agnes and their son Gregory, that is a few months old, that was born in March. What does that birth record say? March 1950. So I had found Jacob, I had found Gregory. So this meant that Gregory was the son of Jacob, the missing person. Now, no judging, no judging. This is Uncle Jakey. I kind of blurred out some of the names just for privacy. But together, Uncle Jakey sired children until after he was well over 50 years old. These are 3 sets of his known children, and the age gaps stretch over 37 years. His first child was sired when he was approximately 17 years old, and his last child was sired when he was well over 50. So if Gregory Punch was in fact Jacob's son, then that means that Jacob's father, George Punch, is the brother of my great-great-grandfather. That means Gregory is the first cousin of my grandfather's mother, and that would make this DNA match second cousins to my grandfather. And what did Ancestry say as a predicted relationship? So second cousin is what Ancestry predicted. So now I have found Jacob. I have successfully connected a DNA match to his as one of his descendants and have extended our family tree. The second brick wall that I ran into, I'm just not seeing this, to find the children and descendants of my 3 times great-grandparents. It's something about these 3 times great-grandparents. I think it's almost because this is that last generation that I'm able to find in the earliest census, in the 1870, 1880 census. So it's like I want to know more, because when you think about it, these people are already in their 50s in 1870. So they're past their childbearing years. So some of the children that they have in their house are not necessarily their children, but grandchildren. So what happened to their children? But there's no census to go back and actually figure out what happened to all of their children. So my grandmother's side, at first she would tell me, oh, I don't know, baby. You know, they really wouldn't talk to us back then about things like that. So I really don't know what to tell you. And I said, okay, that's fine. So I called her first cousin. First cousin said, oh, baby, I'll let you know. I'll let you know everything you need to know. So first cousin told me that my grandmother's father was Jeff Stevens, and they lived in Harrison County. I said, okay, that's the biggest lead that I've ever had. So I go to the 1880 census and I find Jeff Stevens living in the house with his presumed wife and their children, 7 children in Harrison County. I said, okay, this is a good lead. I then move on to the 1900 census and I still see Jeff now listed as Jefferson Stevens with his wife. Instead of Dilsey, she's listed as Dilly. And the first child listed is Sarah, which is my grandmother's grandmother, my 2 times great grandmother, and other children in the home. So after putting these censuses together, this is what I figured out for Jeff. Jeff had a number of children with Dilsey, my 2 times great grandmother, Sarah, in the middle. I have her death certificate, which states that her mother's name is Lula. I have her Social Security application that states that her mother's name is Elsie. So who is her mother? So currently I have her mother is unknown. There's another one of the children, I have her death certificate, and it states that her father is Jeff Stevens, but her mother's first name is Harriet. Who is Harriet? I've looked in the 1880 and the 1900 census and I don't see a Harriet. Who is Harriet? And then there's another daughter, Elizabeth, that I did not know anything about. I said, who is Elizabeth? I could not find anything on Elizabeth. So what did I do? I went to DNA. Same thing like I did with my grandfather's family. And I found these 2 DNA matches that were the first DNA matches that I did not know or have a connection to. Just so happened, these people are actually mother and daughter. Both of them have taken their DNA test. So as I was poking around on their profile, they had a public tree. And look who I see in their tree, Elizabeth Stevens. I said, now, maybe this is another Elizabeth Stevens. I try to give myself the benefit of the doubt. But as I started searching, this Elizabeth Stevens married her husband in Harrison County, Texas, the same place where Jeff Stevens was. She lived in the 1900 census in Harrison County, just as her parents did. So I said, okay, what if this is my Elizabeth Stevens? So that means that Jeff was the father of Elizabeth as well as Sarah, Elizabeth's son, and my great-grandmother would have been first cousins. That means that the grandchild of Elizabeth and the grandchild of Sarah would have been second cousins. Mary, that's my maternal grandmother. My grandmother would have been second cousins once removed to DNA match number 1. We know that they're mother and daughter, so that would mean that the daughter of DNA match 1 would be a second cousin twice removed from my grandmother. And what did Ancestry have to say about it? DNA match number 1, second cousin once removed. DNA match number 2, second cousin twice removed. So again, successfully, I have been able to find and break through brick walls using DNA. So I called my grandmother and I said, do you know if Mama Sarah had any siblings? Oh, baby, I don't know. I said, well, what do you know? because you're not telling me anything now. So I called that first cousin again. And I said, do you know if Mama Sarah had any siblings? She did have siblings. There were a lot of them, but I don't think they all had the same mother and father. So one of the predictions that I have been able to make just by looking at the DNA and looking at the census records and other vital records, it looks as though Jeff was married, had children. His wife died. His new wife brought children into the marriage. And those children then took on Jeff's last name of Stevens. Then, let's say hypothetically, that wife died. So now he has theoretically 3 sets of children, and then his new wife comes in with her children because they're older in age, or some of her grandchildren. They then take on the family name. So there is a huge list of descendants of Jeff, but it is going to take a lot of effort to go through just to decipher which are actual biological children and which ones are actually children that were brought into the marriage. I have to say, and I'll give this little tidbit. If I go back to Dilsey's last name has been shown to be Jennings. If I look at my grandmother's DNA, there is a huge cluster of Jennings, Jennings, Jenkins that are all matching my grandmother. So to me, that tells me either my 2 times great grandmother's mother is in fact Dilsey, or her biological mother is still from the same family of Dilsey, which I have seen done numerous times. The wife dies, he marries the sister, or he marries the first cousin, and that just ties the DNA all up. But so I feel confident in making the conclusions that these brick walls have actually been broken through, tunneled through, based on using DNA as that option and that validated source to be able to validate these connections. I thought this presentation was going to be a lot longer than I have attended. Oh, I'll give this background history. So my grandparents, when the popularity of DNA came out, I took the opportunity to test them at every platform. So I did ancestry DNA on both of them. And then I called my grandmother and I said, hey, would you do another DNA test for me? I'm gonna have to spit. I said, no, ma'am, this is a cheek swab. You'll be okay. Oh, baby, because you know I don't like to spit. That's not ladylike. I don't like to spit. I said, this is a cheek swab. You will be fine. So my grandfather, we did the Y DNA test through family tree DNA. We were able to obtain a haplogroup, which then was able to track him back to almost the beginning of time based on that haplogroup. For my grandmother, we did the mitochondrial DNA test with family tree DNA, and we obtained her haplogroup. And I always had suspicions, let me go back to my grandmother. Looking at my grandmother, to me, I didn't see, to me, she looks like an African-American woman. But as I've seen her age and as I have aged, I see deeper than that. Her natural hair color was like a sandy reddish color. It wasn't a dark color. It wasn't black. It wasn't gray. It was a different color. Her cheekbones are kind of high and very pronounced. And I always wondered, what else is in her DNA? My wife and I, for our honeymoon, we went to the Dominican Republic, Punta Cana. And we're walking around on the resort, and this guy says, hey, who are you? I said, I'm just here on my honeymoon. He says, where are you from? I said, I'm from Texas. I'm from the States. No, 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 no. You are from here. Where are you from? I said, I have no idea. I said, I'm just a man from Dallas, Texas, just trying to enjoy my honeymoon. He said, look at your skin. Your skin does like our skin. And in fact, I looked at my skin. I did not darken. I turned a reddish tone. And I kept that in my mind. But when I did my grandmother's mitochondrial DNA, guess where some of her matches were from? Dominican Republic, all across the Caribbean, all across the northern part of, I probably should include that in my presentation, along the northern part of South America, up through the Panama Canal, up into present day Mexico. My grandmother matches people that are actually currently in those locations. So if you take that information along with the other documentation that we have for the slave ships, that would then let you know, a lot of people say, oh, we're mixed with Native American. We have a lot of Native American. I upset one of my cousins, my grandmother's niece. She was upset because her DNA, she submitted a DNA sample for me and it did not come back with any Native American. And she was extremely upset. Well, my grandmother looked like a Native American. She had long, silky hair and high cheekbones. She was Native American. I said, well, ma'am, the DNA will tell you what? The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth every single time. So some weeks went by. She called me back. She apologized for being so upset. But I had to explain to her that it may not necessarily be Native American characteristics that are showing up, but a combination of different ethnicities being blended together. And that was proven in my grandmother's DNA. I never thought she would have had ancestry in the Caribbean. Most people just think Africa to East Coast. And that was it. Oh no, some of those ships were blown off course. They were purposely going to the Caribbean. I mean, some of them went into South America. I mean, there are a lot of blended African American people. And until you actually take the journey of doing the DNA, you may not even know exactly what you have in your ancestry. And that could be with anyone. You may not know what you're actually mixed with. It could be that one of your ancestors actually tipped out behind the barn, as they say, with someone else. And that DNA then trickled down to you. Like with me, I have a certain percentage of Filipino DNA. Where did that come from? I mean, so you never really know exactly what you are mixed with and what you are comprised of until you actually take that journey and complete a DNA test. The more people, especially with ancestry, the more people that actually do the test, the larger the database becomes. So that means that there are people that are waiting on certain individuals to take that DNA test just to blow their research out of the water and to validate all of those connections that they have. So I implore you, people here, people online, if you have not yet taken an ancestry DNA test, be curious. Take that journey. Take an ancestry DNA test. This is not a plug for ancestry, by the way, but it will definitely help your research. And then if you are blocked, you're stuck, and you don't know what to do with it, I am the person that can help you look through it. I have been self-taught. I have sat down. I have looked at the DNA matches. I have figured out how to line up the ancestors, how to show the different connections, how to validate whether a person is a full blood sibling or a half sibling. I've gone through that exercise with my own personal family. So that is one thing that I will be more than happy to help you with. I think it is just important, not just for African Americans, but for everyone, just to have a truly documented and validated family history. There has been so much family history that has been passed down by word of mouth. Nothing is documented, nothing has been validated. And there are a lot of people now that have taken the journey and they are upset because what they have been told their entire life is not true. So instead of having future generations to have to deal with that, having to deal with a sense of loss of identity because they have identified with a certain race, they have identified with a certain type of people, based on what they were told. And then once they get older and they find out the truth, that is a huge culture shock for them. One of my clients, he found out just by doing the ancestry DNA test that his father was not his biological father. This was a 53-year-old man. And he literally cried on the phone. He said, what am I supposed to do with this information? My kids have this man's last name. My grandkids have this man's last name. What am I supposed to do with this? I feel that is not something a 50-year-old person should have to deal with. At 50 years old, you should be confident in who you are and know who you are and not have to deal with things being hidden and things being locked away in a closet. I realized during the time there were a lot of things that were done that people, as they got older and they matured, they were ashamed of. And they just did not want to disclose that information. I get that. I understand that. But in order for us to be able to document and validate our family history, some of those things have to be discovered. Some of those things have to be dug in. I mean, as painful as it may be for that person, hopefully that person is not here, but digging through that information. And I tell my clients, I tell my family members all the time, this is not something that I use to shame a person. This is not something that I use to exploit a person or to put their business out there in the streets. This is something literally just to validate our family. I mean, my great grandmother had 12 to 14 kids. Her mother had 14 to 16 kids. I mean, there are a lot of us. Some of the children died young. Some of them moved away. I have family members that I have recently found based on DNA. I had a person that she contacted me and she said, I don't know where I fit with your family, but I'm here. So I called her on the phone and she said, well, I was told that we come from Texas. I said, okay, well, that's where I am. So we have that part right. I said, do you know any other information? And she said, no, not really. She said, but I have a picture of who they told me my dad was. And the picture she sent me was my family all over. There was no denying where she came from. So taking her name, taking her birth record, then following through the life, the journey of my family members that I knew that moved to California, we were able to figure out exactly who her father was and exactly how she connected to this family. I mean, this is not necessarily a game, but this is an exercise of literally connecting people. The Bible says that we are all connected. This is literally connecting everyone together. And this is just one way that I feel like I can contribute to that effort. I know there are a lot of people that are curious and they're just antsy, but they just don't want to open Pandora's box. I get that, and I understand that. But just take some time to evaluate what you will gain by taking that step. Not necessarily the emotions, the negative part, but what you will gain from actually taking this step. So I've taken up some more time. So that concludes my presentation. I thank you all for participating today. Those of you online, I thank you for taking time out of your day to interact with us. And we will now open up for questions and answers. Yes, ma'am. Okay, they're getting microphones so that everyone online will be able to hear as well.
Name. I have a lot of aliases and they all go to the senior most maternal woman and they change your name to Polly. And when they pass away, it seems like their first name is always Polly. So then you have to figure out, well, what was their name at birth? Ever heard of that?
Their first name?
Yeah, their given name.
So I'm gonna go back to my grandfather. There was a story that he told me about, let's just say, one of our family members getting into some trouble in Louisiana. And he literally changed his entire identity and lived the rest of his life with that new name. But again, DNA tells you the whole truth. I know of his descendants. I know they've taken the DNA test, but they were falling in a different pattern. If this person was who he truly said he was, you should have been matching somewhere else. But in fact, that's how we were able to discover this person had to be someone else than who they say that they were. And I've had that happen on both sides of my family, my mother and my father's side. Again, I had family members that love to live life and live it to the fullest. So yes, I have heard of that. And it makes it very, very difficult to track. Yes, yes.
Hello, thank you very much. Enjoyed that. One thing, this is slightly off the DNA mark, but for those of us who do research, and I try to do a lot of like transcribing records and posting them like on Family Search so people can, can see this information later. For those of us who are interested in trying to help identify particularly some of the African-American, they're not their records, but for example, if I have a will, and I did have some family members that did have slaves, so there's information about them. It doesn't have a full name, but it might have a name and their age. And obviously it would be information that if that's your family, you would want to know. So I'm just wondering, is there something that we collectively as genealogists can be doing, or a place that we can post information that can help? Because you may not know to go looking under that person's name to try and find that part of the family. So I'm just wondering if there's something that we can do.
It's funny that you say that. I had a client that I was doing research for, and during his research, I found out that his ancestors owned slaves, which he did not know. There was a full list of his last will and testament that listed all of the slaves by name. So during our consultation, I disclosed this information to him. And I said, I don't know what you want to do with that information, but I just felt compelled to tell you that. He said, I know exactly what to do. He said, so you're working on phase 1 and phase 2 for me? Phase 3, I want you to research to try to find those slaves and try to find those descendants to see if there are any people that are living that are looking for their ancestors. So there are people that care. There are people that want this to be done. But as far as a platform, I don't know of one. But that is definitely something that I want to look into. Because I mean, there's a lot of African-American history that is embedded within the personal records of the white slave owners. I mean, there is a Bible that even listed the slaves and listed their birth dates, and it's in North Carolina. The family donated it to a society in North Carolina. So it's there. And it has my ancestors listed in the Bible. Yes. Yes. Most definitely. Definitely.
We have an online question.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a best practice for getting responses from DNA matches you reach out to?
I don't. It is still a hit and miss. If a person actually gives me enough information, then Google becomes my best friend. Facebook could become your best friend. And you could utilize those platforms to find out more information. There are some people that on Mother's Day, Facebook has this pretty little border that says, I love mom or Happy Mother's Day. Well, someone's not going to put that border around someone that's not their mother or not their grandmother. So if you look at that picture, that could be an indication that you are looking at that person's mother. And that could be the information that you're needing to connect with your research. Although they did not provide a family tree on Ancestry, that is another way of actually getting the information that you need without them actually responding to you. Did I answer your question?
Denise, did that answer your question? Yes, it did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Christopher.
Daddy,
Hold on. That was my daughter. Hold on. No, no.
Daddy, were your family members children stillborn? Were one of them stillborn?
Yes, we did have some of our family members of our ancestors that were stillborn, unfortunately. Yes. Yes, sir. We have a question here.
Yes, well, thank you for a very interesting presentation.
Yes, sir.
Point out, and you're probably aware, with that first brick wall, I think it was a George Punch
Yes.
born in New York in March 1950 that showed up in the census.
Yes.
Of course, the census date was the 1st of April.
Yes.
And had he been born a month later, he wouldn't be in the census.
Definitely.
And you wouldn't have had that
Yes.
good luck.
Yes.
You mentioned people encouraging people to take tests. You know, for the DNA, it's primarily, I'd say even more United States and North America and Western Europe. How big are the pools in, let's say, the Caribbean or even the African Americans in the United States? How many people of those places and nationalities have taken tests?
I actually, especially on my grandmother's side, I have seen DNA matches from people that are from the Dominican Republic. Or it could be that they are second generation living here in the United States, but they have provided a family tree with information of their parents or grandparents that were native to Dominican Republic. So I have seen that. And I think with the popularity of DNA, there are more and more people that are just wanting to do it. And again, I say there are some people that are just curious for themselves, but in turn, it helps us with our research because they connect to us unknowingly. Yes. Yes.
Is Family Search working on a African American project? Is it called ROAR, ROAR?
I have heard something about that. I am not familiar with exactly where they are in the process, but I know that they are trying to build something that caters to African American ancestry, because it definitely is something that needs a lot of work. And it's going to take a lot of effort from a lot of people to be able to get that brought together and to make sure that everything is validated and that we are not extending false information or unvalidated information and giving these people false hope that they found their ancestor when in actuality they haven't. The oral history, and also I have a cousin, I'm not sure if she's on or not, but she and I connect. She matches all of my dad's side of the family. We have another brick wall with my 2 times great grandfather on that side. And we pretty much just know that he was born in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and he ended up in Texas. We don't know who his parents are. There have been speculations as to who his parents are, but I have not been able to find anything to validate that. But there is a cluster of DNA matches that have been in Vicksburg, Mississippi for generations. And she matches our DNA. And she and I are working tirelessly trying to figure out exactly how we connect. Because the story goes that my 2 times great grandfather escaped from the plantation and came to Texas. He then came here, got established, went back and snuck out his brother, brought him to Texas. He got established. Then they both went back to get their sisters. They got two of the sisters out, came back to Texas, got them established. And then they had a set of fraternal brother and sister twins that they were not able to get out. So what happened to those twins? Did they stay in Vicksburg? Did they get married? Did they have children? Am I looking at one of the descendants of one of those twins? So that's something that we're working on tirelessly. But yes, African-American research. I actually have a connection with Family Tree and with the Church of Latter-day Saints, and I would definitely talk to them. If you want to give me your contact information, I would definitely talk to them. Their family center, I frequently visit there, and I would definitely mention that to them and see if I can obtain some information for you. Definitely.
We have another question online. Florence, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. This is my very first time being here, and this is my journey, my very first step. So what would be my first step to do? What would you suggest be my first step to getting on this journey of finding out my family and their history and so forth?
I would say, well, I want to thank you and welcome you for this being your first time. I would say your first step would be to write down, get a journal and write down everything that you know or you have been told. That way that you can have somewhat of a foundation to start with. Then after you have created that journal, created that preliminary family tree, I would then say, if you are willing to take the ancestry DNA test, then you would be able to validate those things that you have been told with the DNA, because you would have first cousins that would pop up. You would have second cousins that would validate your great grandparents. So I would say, yes, first start with a journal, write down all of those things that you know, then sketch out a preliminary family tree, and then start with the DNA. Take an ancestry DNA test or another platform if you choose, and then start to figure out if you can validate those connections that you currently have in your family tree.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
There's a couple of comments as well. Emily says there's several Facebook groups designed to accept information from persons whose families may have owned slaves. And then two people posted the Beyond Kin project, which is beyondkin.org. And it's for genealogists who descend from slaveholders who are uniquely positioned to revolutionize genealogy for their African-American colleagues.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you.
And
for
there's
that.
also lots of great presentations. Thank you very much in the chat.
Well, thank all of you for participating today. I think we have another question here in person.
The woman who's beginning her research, she can take ancestry DNA and then she can transfer that DNA to family tree DNA in MyHeritage.
Yes. So what we're being told here in person, which is something I'm also familiar with, if you take your ancestry DNA test, you can then download your raw DNA, and then you're able to upload that DNA to Family Tree DNA as well as MyHeritage. And there's also GEDmatch that is also created to house all of the different DNA platforms. So you can upload your DNA to there as well, so that you're able, so that it doesn't have to become a financial strain to buy all of these different tests. You can just upload to these other platforms, and then you can be matched with people in their database without actually having to purchase a test per se. Thank you for that reminder.
Any other questions?
Again, I would like to thank all of you for your time and for allowing me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher.
Wow, what a great presentation. Thank you, everybody, for attending, both the people online and those of you who are here in person. And we will adjourn our meeting now. I want to encourage you to go online and register for the awards banquet next month, and we hope we will see you all there.
This has been a production of the Dallas Genealogical Society. If you're already a member, thank you. Your fees have been supporting these and other society activities. If you're not yet a member, please consider joining now. Go to dallasgenealogy.org and click on the membership tab.